Yes, thank you so much. So let me just straight away hand this over to Dr. Kumar to take us through the session for today. Doc, we're all yours.
Thanks, Dr. Richard, and hello, colleagues. Very warm welcome from Bonn in Germany. Warm here is no more a pun intended because it's extremely hot in Europe for the last few days, and it's going to cross 40 degrees in Bonn, which is very unheard of in Germany. What I would do in my presentation, and some of you might already who were present in the previous webinars as well as in the previous working group meeting Congress in Malta, may already be aware of some of the things that I would be talking about, but I will present the latest in terms of where we are on disaster risk reduction vis-a-vis national auditing systems. So I'll share my screen and feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat box. We will, of course, I'll wait for more interactive discussions towards the end of the session. So just a moment. So I hope you can see my screen and I'll kick off. So in my presentation today, what I would do is that I would focus on few key topics. One, I will talk a bit about how disaster risk reduction has been evolving over the last several decades, but together with the work ongoing on enhancing action on climate change to avert, minimize, address loss and damage, adapting to a climate change, and so on. How do the monitoring, reporting, and accountability mechanisms that we have within disaster risk management domain would be of relevance to national auditing practices? And what are the latest opportunities for all of us to work together collaboratively in the larger interest of better accountability in risk governance? So just to give a backdrop in terms of how we are operating and how we have reached where we are. So we long back when we're talking about several decades ago, the international humanitarian architecture was still evolving and the disaster response was often very ad hoc. And then came the international decade for natural disaster reduction starting 1989. So the decade of 1990s was the decade of natural disaster reduction. It also goes on to show how we have evolved in our own thinking on disaster risk management. We don't use the term natural disasters anymore because we believe that there are only natural hazards, but not natural disasters. And every disaster is a demonstrative evidence of the failure of human beings and the governance. Otherwise, the impact across all hazards would be the same. In the middle of this decade, we had the Yokohama strategy. This decade resulted in the establishment of my organization, then called the UNISDR, now called the UNDRR, the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We then had the Hyogo framework from 2005 to 15, and in the end of the decade, we had the Sendai framework starting 2015, and we have already completed more than 10 years of Sendai framework implementation. This was together while we were talking about Sendai framework. We also were very much evident and reminiscent of the development paradigms changing from the MDGs to the SDGs. So 2015 was also the year when the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was endorsed and was also the year when Paris Agreement was also adopted. So that year of 2015 is often referred to as the year of resilience, with 3 international frameworks adopted back to back. And more recently, we have concluded the midterm reviews of Sendai framework, a stocktake of the Paris Agreement, and also the continued review of the 2030 Agenda. And this is something I'll come to very soon. Now, while disaster risk management was evolving, we were also talking about what are the key benefits, what are the key achievements we have made over these decades of progress. One of the key things that we have observed is that there has been now a structured dialogue on disaster risk reduction. Every government in the world now has a dedicated institutional mechanism on disaster risk management with an identified focal point who works with us and with many other UN and international organizations, but also coordinates the implementation of disaster risk management in their own country. All the countries in the world now also have some form of a national policy document, a strategy, or a framework for channeling disaster risk management and coordinating it in the country. More recently, we have seen the big data revolution with hundreds of countries reporting on their progress in Sendai framework, in SDGs, and so on. We have also seen increasing diversity of the actors. When I attended the first global platform in my life, which was around 15 years ago, I had seen people attending only in their military uniforms because most of the disaster risk management institutions attended were from the military or civil defense institutions. And now we are seeing a bit of a diversification with public health specialists, nuclear scientists, climate change specialists, all coming in to talk about disaster risk management. So there is increased diversity in the crowd. During the Hyogo framework from 2005 to 15, at the end of the decade, when we assessed the progress being made in disaster risk management, we saw that it's a mixed picture. On the one hand, we had seen very high level of achievements in governance and preparedness mechanisms, but we also saw very low progress being made in addressing the underlying causes of risk. This also meant that while our efforts did yield results in terms of containing mortality of disasters, we also saw that the economic losses continue to increase. This map shows the countries where it compares the losses being made because of disaster vis-a-vis the investments being made for social and economic development. The darker the shade is, the more the country is losing their investments because of disasters. And then came the stocktake. The midterm review of the Sendai framework told us a similar story, as was the case with the Paris Agreement, as was the case with SDGs. That one, we are not on track in fulfilling the objectives and achieving the targets that we had set in 2015. But we are also acting in a very fragmented and siloed way while the world continues to warm and keeps manifesting the recent and more disastrous consequences through extreme and slow onset events. We have also seen that a traffic light approach often tells us where we are with resilience building. I just mentioned that we have seen some success in terms of reducing disaster mortality. So the total number of losses resulting from disasters in terms of mortality has declined by two-thirds in the last decade compared to the previous decade. But at the same time, it still remains high. We still see more than 40,000 officially reported deaths every year. But we are also seeing very high level of economic losses. The number of affected population actually has increased over the same duration, and it has doubled in the last 10 years. The economic losses, and when it comes to officially reported data, it's 200 billion per year. But we look at the indirect losses as well, it crosses $2 trillion. We have also seen very high losses in terms of infrastructure and service disruption as well. While the progress in terms of financing and early warning systems has not really declined, but they have also not gone at the speed with which we wanted. So if you look at the 7 targets of the Sendai framework, which was on the left-hand side of the screen, and adopt a traffic light approach, you will see, okay, good success perhaps on mortality and governance, decent, but not with the pace we wanted on financing and early warning, and deceleration, actually backtracking in terms of economic losses and affected population. What does it mean in terms of national auditing system? And if we approach national auditing from the lenses of the conventional financial audit, performance audit, and compliance audit, disaster risk reduction in that context becomes very, very relevant. One, in terms of the sheer economic losses that a country is facing. So when the financial statements of a country are prepared by the auditors, how much are the losses resulting from disasters are being encapsulated? How much is it being configured within the financial audits of a country is a question that we should be further pondering upon. Similar is also the case with the performance audit in terms of when investments are made into disaster risk reduction, what are the returns that we get from that investment? Because the return to DRR investment may be no disaster happening. And it is always very difficult to demonstrate the impact of disaster risk reduction, because the best thing that will happen is that nothing will happen. So how do you ensure the financial performance in terms of the auditing point of view? This third part is more in terms of the long-term developmental risk-informed development paradigms that we talk about. So as we shift from reactive crisis management to proactive risk management, how do auditors take into account the compliance of measures that were integrated? For example, the building codes. If the building codes were not followed and investments were made into developing building codes, it leads to disasters and hence economic losses and consequences for the country. But this is because of a compliance issue. And hence, how do we ensure that compliance-based audit also takes into account the investments that have been made into resilience building? This has also gained a lot of traction in the last couple of years. There was a UNGA resolution, and I'm sure all of you are aware of it, in 2024, which highlighted the role of supreme auditing institutions in terms of addressing climate change, but also in terms of encouraging the member states to consider this kind of data in the supreme auditing institution reports and the audit reports of the countries. So I'm very pleased and encouraged to see a lot of work has been going on in your world in terms of the auditors world. The GID 5330 was one of the seminal works. A lot of work went into developing the disaster resilience framework as well. And then very specific national auditing systems and audits have actually taken into account the investments being made into disaster risk reduction. A lot needs to be done. Last year, we did have a very dedicated discussion on this, both at the global level as well as in the regional level through the global and regional platforms. And this highlighted the role of supreme auditing institutions as well. So I will now deep dive a bit into some of the emerging opportunities that have emerged in the last few years. We have seen already talked about the progress review in the terms of global stocktake and the midterm review of the Sendai framework. We have seen a good progress being made on adaptation front with a global goal on adaptation in the Paris Agreement. It's constituted indicators that were adopted in the COP30 in Belém. A lot of work ongoing in terms of national adaptation planning, including the revised guidelines that were released last year. We have been supporting the operationalization of these indicators as well as national adaptation plan through our comprehensive risk management approach. The loss and damage part of climate action is also evolving. We have the three pillars of loss and damage now fully in place, which includes the policy arm, the executive committee, the technical assistance arm, the Santiago network, and the financing arm, the fund for responding to loss and damage. And then we have a lot of progress being made in terms of data ecosystem and its strengthening. We have good amount of data on loss and damage, on adaptation and disaster risk reduction, as well as a lot of push being received through Early Warnings for All initiative, which aims to cover every person on earth with early warning. So these are some of the recent opportunities, but it also demands that we work together. And this was one of the key findings I had highlighted earlier, that while we understand and appreciate the challenge at hand, our efforts to manage that challenge and address it is still very much fragmented. Just to give an example, 141 countries in the world, that blue map that you see on the top, are the ones that have a disaster risk reduction strategy. While there are around 87 countries and the number keeps increasing, with a green map with a number of countries that have a national adaptation plan. Now, if you keep them together, you'll see that there are many countries in the world which are in dark blue that have both DRR and National Adaptation Plan. There are many countries that have one but not the other. So the ones in green are the ones only with National Adaptation Plan. The one with light blue are the ones with only DRR plan. And the ones in red are the ones which have neither. Despite the fact that many countries, more than 45 or 50 of them, which have both DRR and national adaptation plans, these are often implemented by two different ministries in the same country. But the activities that they implement are sometimes not very different. Just to give an example, nature-based solutions, early warning systems, infrastructure resilience, mobility addressing are many of the topics which are reflected very much in both adaptation and disaster risk reduction plans, but they're implemented by two different institutions. And hence the policy imperative here is that how we work together to ensure that if a country is in red and doesn't have either of the plan, can this be co-created? A country that has one but not the other, can the existing planning system can be evolved, can be expanded to also cover topics which it doesn't include? Or if a country has both the plans, can it be co-implemented in collaboration between different institutions? The opportunities that the global goal on adaptation has provided is also immense in terms of the 59 indicators that exist across 7 thematic targets and 4 adaptation cycle targets. And we expect that a lot of data will come up. I don't have very good news to share on this. The Bonn Climate Conference that just ended 3 days back here in Bonn did not end in a concrete outcome, and hence this will be further discussed at COP31 in Turkey. But we are blessed with a lot of data. I mean, the dearth of data is not an issue. The access to it is often and one of the key issues that we have observed that the public access to data officially hosted by the governments has been a challenge. And hence we have been working very closely with the governments to extract and collect the data that the governments have been collecting and put it in a format which is accessible to all, which is easy to analyze, but also follows the right data standards to ensure comparability across time and space. So more than 100 countries have benefited from this process. And working further on this, we have now launched a new system called Delta Resilience that will provide much more standardized and disaggregated data for countries which have access to it now. We have also been working very closely with the governments to report on their progress. Happy to inform that 90% of the UN member states have reported now on the Sendai Framework Monitor and hence also contributing to the SDGs. You will see this is a mapping that you see on the right side with many of the SDG indicators being shared with Sendai Framework so that the countries do not have to report twice. They report only to us and we compile that information for SDG. We also have been doing the same for ABAS, for SIDS, for New Urban Agenda, and we also plan to do if the member states agree in terms of the global goal and adaptation. There are better instruments also in place now to better understand public financing systems and budget. A key area of work is to understand how much governments are spending on disaster risk reduction. But how do we do that? It's very easy to see a disaster has happened and how much of relief work that the government has done. But it's very complicated to understand how much of investments was made for risk-informed development, for example, because that goes to every sector and tries to approach it from a sectoral but also the developmental lens. To do so, partnering with many organizations, there is a budget tagging and tracking process through which the governments can now fully understand how much of investments are being made into domestic budgets for disaster risk reduction. And it also tells us what are the gaps therein and how much of financing is needed based on the economic losses and other disaster losses that I have described earlier. It also helps us in terms of better understanding of the standards for infrastructure resilience, for example, or financial resilience, and also understanding the approaches that you need to take into account for better prevention of disasters. So these are some concrete examples of how the 3 lenses of auditing can be approached. A lot of work happens at the local level. So these are some of the latest standards that we have been developing through city resilience, urban resilience, guide on adaptation, financing, and data standards for infrastructure resilience. So I will go back to the same slide that I had shown earlier. From the lenses of financial auditing, performance auditing, and compliance auditing, we need to really leverage these instruments, these data, and also ensure that disaster risk reduction is fully integrated into national auditing processes. So we have been working very closely with many of the institutions at the global level, at the regional level, at the national level to strengthen disaster risk reduction and integration into auditing processes. We have offered our services in terms of ensuring that the national reports that the governments have been collecting and reporting can also be leveraged for auditing stock take, and we can do a kind of a knowledge product to ensure how much this has been done and what are the gaps therein. This is something we have thought of. We have also thought of what are the audit standards? How do we, all of you, when you do the audits in the country, can integrate DRR data standards better? How do you integrate official metrics into the analysis? And that's something which we can work further. We have also discussed plans to host workshops, technical guidance, and provide technical advice to all of you as well. And also overall, having better access to disaster related data to strengthen auditing better. A very concrete outcome of all of this was working towards developing a training module for the auditors on disaster risk reduction. So we have been working very closely with ICED, which is a training facility. We have had multiple rounds of discussion, and it's a very rough structure that you see on the screen in 5 modules on how this technical module can be developed in terms of leveraging the IRR data for auditing purposes. Many of you may have already received a survey on audit for disaster risk reduction. And I understand from the new chair for the WGA from Thailand that a lot of countries have already responded to the survey. We have also discussed the potential of organizing international webinar on this topic to further socialize the topic. So with that, I would end and very happy to hear your questions, your reflections, and also suggestions in terms of how do we strengthen this collaboration. So Richard, back to you.
All right. Right. Thank you very much, Doc. Maybe I should just call you Prof. Thank you so much for the information.
Animesh is
And
good enough.
colleagues, so he promised me he was going to make the presentation very short because he was more interested in our questions and the interactions we have after the presentations. He wants to hear from us. He wants to help us understand better how to approach this area. So we're going to leave the space open. If you are able to, please just give us a wave, and then you can shoot with a question. Otherwise, if you want to put a question in also the chat, we can read it out later for him to respond. Okay. All right. So it's open for questions. Let's take this up, please. Any questions for Doc? Or maybe I start. There's so much data, Doc. There's a lot of data that's out there for this kind of space. And even in this presentation, you've shown us so many sources and spaces of data. The big question in my head is, where do we start? Where do we start as auditors? We know the impacts of disaster, the impact of climate on our lives and everything, but really, where can we start this conversation from as auditors? Maybe we
Thanks.
can take that as we wait for other questions here.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think that's a very good Kickstarter of a discussion. So every country has been collecting good amount of data on the disaster impact. Many countries have also collected the data on the amount of investments being made into disaster risk reduction. I think that's enough in terms of a good starting point for auditing purposes. So, for example, if a national audit report is being prepared, it always has the financial statement process, the standard one, but how much of it already includes the economic losses that a country has faced? So perhaps not necessarily in the form of the financial sheet itself, but in the narrative, the audit reports can start integrating those elements because that's the money which is lost. And is that being taken into account for the audit reports? So a narrative on that would itself be a good kick starting point. Secondly, in terms of the investment, so more concretely, the investments being made into disaster risk reduction is also some information which is readily available and can also be integrated into the analysis and also as well as in the audit. And then it would give an insight that if this is the amount of losses that the country is facing, and if this is the investment that is being released and that is being realized, then what further investments may be required and what is the efficiency of financial investments that the country has made. So these are some of the key questions that can already be integrated into the discussions and that can further strengthen the audit reports. I think at the end of it, it's about accountability and accountability in risk governance. The challenge at hand is that it always makes a better political sense for the disaster to happen, for the relief to be distributed, and hence getting political visibility in the process. The prevention side of it, when you prevent the disasters and do the best way to prevent a disaster from happening, it doesn't really make the headline news. And I think approaching it from an accountability point of view really makes a difference to ensure that people do realize that it is an economic rationale for preventing the disaster from happening than letting it happen and then spending money on relief and operations.
If- Yeah. I mean, this is great. Thank you. But also looking at it from our point of view, financial audits, compliance audits are really eager and wanting to do this. But I mean, from our side, there hasn't been enough standards to help us conduct such audits. We have a bit of a leeway in terms of performance audits, where we have mostly, again, because we report to Parliament and we expect that Parliament to discuss these audits. Performance audits gives us the opportunity to have narratives on these conversations. Um, Narratives brings a problem. The problem is there's so much to see, so much to say. What would you say for an SAI that is planning to do or is starting an audit in this space? What should be the biggest red flag? Maybe two or three, if you can.
I think the starting point on the what an auditor should definitely look at should be what are the hotspots in the country where disasters have happened, and that is very easy. It's readily available. The information is there, and are the disasters happening recurrently in a specific area? What is the government doing in terms of investing into disaster risk reduction in that area, and is that resulting in some level of reduction in impact? All of this can be very easily shown through data. And there are very good examples from countries where the level of impact has declined through investments. And there are also equally examples from countries where investments have not been made to the optimal level, which would have resulted in the reduction of impact. So I think that could be a good way to enhance in terms of understanding the hotspots of disasters in a country at the subnational level and starting point from there.
Mm. But is it very easy to spot greenwashing from this? Our country is not greenwashing on the data they're releasing out, that we might be in that space of dealing with data that is wrong to start with. How do we spot such things?
I think part of it is that as I mean, we as UN institution
Mm,
always depend on the government-owned data to establish the right level of accountability in governance. Because if we use media-reported data, for example, then that can be questioned as well. But we also do a lot of cross-tabulation, kind of cross-verification to ensure that the right data has been reported. But even if
mm,
it is no data is 100% reliable, over a period of
mm,
time, if you're looking at the risk hotspot and looking at hundreds of years of data, or at least last 20 or 30 years of data, you would always see that some level of trend and patterns are emerging. And it's not just about one-stop shop or one specific point of data, which is important. It's about the accumulation of data of data on impact or data on investments over a period of time that will help one understand the impact better.
mm. Right. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are still open for some questions for Doctor. If you have any questions you want to share with Doctor, just don't let me turn this into a one-on-one with him, because I still have a lot of questions to ask him. But let's hear from you. You are the guys on this field. You are doing more of the side business, so you should have a few questions for him.
And in particular, I mean, in the last two slides, I did share some examples of the proposed work that we have discussed with other regional and global inter-SAI-based organizations in the WGEA.
Mm-hmm.
So your feedback on that will also be very helpful, in particular on the training module that we have been discussing, which will be also shared with you very soon.
Sure, sure. That would be great. I mean, I can see from the list of attendees, a representative from AFROSAI WGEA. That would be a great opportunity to also look at how we can localize some of these conversations to tackle the African space, and what collaborations we can have going forward. Michael, maybe if you have any thoughts on this, you could share with us. And as we wait for Michael to share, we have also seen through the climate scanner that we have, a lot of us have gone through. that governments know how much they are receiving for issues on climate. What they are not sure about is how they are spending it. How is this even possible?
That's an
How is it that you
interesting.
don't know what you're spending? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point because we have observed that a lot of funding that goes into climate action, including on adaptation and loss and damage, for example, or even mitigation for that matter, a big portion of that funding is coming from international climate finance, while a
Mm,
big portion of disaster risk reduction funding actually comes from public finance. And both of them would require accountability. I'm sure that when a country receives funding from the GCF or any of the climate financing mechanisms, the accountability mechanisms are very strong, and the countries are reporting to the international organizations for that.
mm,
So could also be the case with the public finance through the national auditing institutions and the budgetary processes. How do the two come together is the question to ask, because I have not seen them
mm,
coherently being analyzed in the sense that do we have an investment framework in a country where we know that these are the challenges we are facing, this is our budget, and part of this budget is coming from public finance and part of it is coming from international finance. Majority of the international finance are often in the form of time-bound projects, while a majority of the public finance are as part of the regular exchequer-based public finance processes. So the two don't often come together in a very coherent manner. So I think
mm,
that is something which would be a very interesting task to do as well, that how a country is investing well enough to and sourcing it from different sources, including from international as well as the public finance mechanisms.
mm, mm. That should be interesting. I'm not sure what findings will come out with. I know that these findings will push government, but that should be an interesting conversation going forward. Yeah, so colleagues, we are still waiting. If you have anything to add, we'd love to. Otherwise, I would mention your names and force you to speak because I know what is happening in your countries. I'm just not sure why you are not responding to these questions. Just give ourselves a few minutes. Let's see what we can get from colleagues. I see Sai Botswana here, and I know you're experiencing extreme heat currently, which is a new level of disaster coming your way. I see I see Sai Uganda here. I see Ghana, I see Kenya, I see Tanzania, I see Ethiopia, and you're all experiencing very different things. It's extremely wet in West Africa currently, and there's so much floods happening, unprecedented floods. How are we prepared for this? So, colleagues, please open up and ask a few questions of Doctor before we let him go because it's a very difficult man to find. Okay, yes, Tatenda, please go on. Unmute and go on, please.
Thank you so much. I just want to ask, is there any country in which the budget information and the spending related to the climate change, which is publicly available, and also accessible, and also being tracked again, so as to enhance accountability and transparency?
Okay, I'm not sure if I heard you right, but Doc, did you get this question, please?
The audio wasn't very clear,
It
so
wasn't too
maybe
clear. Tatenda, if you could kindly repeat your question a bit clearer and louder so we pick up.
Okay, just for the learning purposes, is there any country on which, the budget information as well the spending related to the climatic change and the disaster issues is publicly available and also accessible by the citizens, on which
yeah,
the
yeah.
citizens can be able to track and to enhance accountability and transparency in terms of spending towards the towards the climate change disaster risk reduction strategy, and also their linkage to the public finance management system.
Yeah, I think I get the question in terms of how much of climate finance that a country gets from international sources publicly available. Like how much is the information publicly available? Is that the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are two ways of looking at it. If you look at the climate finance information, it's largely publicly available at international databases. So if you look at the UNFCCC Climate Data Hub, by developed country, by developing country. So developed countries, how much finance was provided, and developing country, how much finance was received, is all available on the global tracking systems of UNFCCC. We also have specific instruments like the nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Often countries cost their requirements, and as part of the transparency initiative, they also say, this is how much we need, this is how much we have, these are the sources, and these are the gaps. Again, those sources are available in those documents. Where the information is a bit weak is that one is the public finance data is not often accessible, but also the international finance received by the countries themselves in the domestic exchequers are not very visible. That's something which we have seen across many countries. So to access financing received by a country from international sources, especially for climate finance, I think going to the international databases would give you a bit of a coherent picture on how much financing was received by countries. And that would be available more consistently, including on climate financing mechanism websites as well. How much is a country releasing the financing it has received in the domestic websites and publicly available information varies a lot across countries. So I would rather go by the one-stop shop for information, and I'll look for the link and put it on the chat box as well.
Right, thank you. Tatenda, I hope you are okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great. Fella from Botswana, please go on.
Thank you. I just have a question here. I just want in my country, as a way to deal with or manage disaster, we use an early warning system, basically to empower the community, protect the livelihoods, or prevent loss. So as a performance auditor, I've always wondered, like, how can we determine the effectiveness of, such I don't know if I should call them like campaigns or such warnings. Like as a performance auditor, how would you carry such an audit to determine if they are effective? Thank you.
Yeah. On early warning systems, it is a proven mechanism for saving lives, saving livelihoods and assets. And we have very good information in terms of how much of investments a country is making, how much of financing a country is receiving for early warning systems, and how much has the progress been made in terms of early warning systems. We also have good information reported by countries because the early warning system works in a value chain approach. It's about 4 pillars. The first one is about the level of information one has. Second is about how much of monitoring is done for evolving hazard. Third is about communication to the communities. And fourth is about what actions do the communities take once the information is received. So that part in terms of enhancing the capacity of early warning system, its efficiency and efficacy, that information is very much available. And I can again send you a link to a dashboard, and you can go to Botswana or for that matter, any other country to see the information that is available. Where we don't have good know-how is in terms of measuring the effectiveness of early warning system, because effectiveness of early warning systems can be measured at multiple levels. One is the kind of the composite score of multiple investments being made into early warning system, because the assumption is that early warning always delivers. The second level is in terms of what actions did the communities take once they receive the early warning system, early warnings. The third level will be how much of lives was protected because of the issuance of an early warning system. That's the level we would want to reach in terms of enhancing and measuring the effectiveness of early warning system. But the challenge with investments in early warning system is that what if we invested good amount of funding into early warning system, making it more robust, very comprehensive, but the disaster did not happen. We knew hazard happened for the next 5 years. Is that a wasted resource? Because it's very difficult to ensure that early warning systems will always be present and for the complexity of hazards that are there. But we are reaching there, and you will also soon on this dashboard that I have the link that I pasted on your chat, you will see information on effectiveness of early warning as well. I would also want to inform that we release a global status report on early warning systems every year. And every COP, we launch that report, and you will see some very good practices of how effective early warning systems have been across the different parts of the world.
Right. That's great. And thank you, Fela. Still open for a few minutes to take your questions. Oh, Natanda, you're back. Okay, just before Muchuti, let's take Tatenda quickly, and then we'll come to you. Tatenda.
Thank you so much, Richard. Yeah, I just mentioned this clarify on the DRR strategy as well the National Adaptation Plan, as well the relationship between the two, and also another one, like it's on training, on training workshop and resources. Like, are those the highlighted trainings? Are they available for free, or you need to sell yourself, or they are paid for, or are they free courses which one
Tatenda,
can do online?
Tatenda, sorry, I'm struggling to hear you. The audio is a bit patchy.
Yeah.
Could you kindly type in the chat box
Okay,
the
thank
question
you.
so that okay,
Are
it's
you
clearer
hearing
now.
me now?
Yes, we can hear you clearly now.
Okay, yeah. The first one was on the relationship between the DRR strategies and the national adaptation plans. Like from the presentation, it has been indicated that 141 countries reported DRR strategies, and also 87 countries have national adaptation plans, like the relationship between these two items. And then another follow-up question is like on the trainings and resources. Like, are these highlighted training workshop and resources available for free online, so that one can, and being self-paced, on which one can just register and do it on their own pace, or you need to go through some certain processes for one to do them? Thank you.
No, thanks. Thanks. Now that is very clear. So on the first question between DRR plans and the national adaptation plans, the two planning instruments have evolved over time by two different intergovernmental processes globally. So the disaster risk reduction process and the UNFCCC climate processes. Those are the two planning instruments that land. There are also differences in terms of the climate rationale. The disaster risk reduction plan look into all hazards, while the national adaptation plans would look into climate-induced and climate-related hazards. But at the same time, disaster risk management plans often look into short to medium term of risks, while the climate change adaptation plans look into the medium to long term risks. And it becomes even more interesting when it comes to their implementation. So normally it's national disaster management offices in countries, often located in the ministries of interior, civil protection, in many countries in the prime minister's or president's office. Like in Uganda, it is in the office of the prime minister. In Zimbabwe, Zambia, vice president's office, and so on. While the national adaptation plans are hosted and implemented by the ministries of environment and climate change. Having said that, while the differences are appreciated, if you look at them from a common lens, you would see that we're not talking about very different things. So, for example, if it is about short to medium term risk management through disaster risk reduction plans and medium to long term risk management through national adaptation plans, perhaps we are already talking about a continuum of actions that can be taken from short to medium to long term. And hence, there is a very strong need for working more coherently and working much more in synergy rather than having two different planning instruments, then looking for two different sources of funding for activities which are often complementary and in some cases the same. Let me take an example of early warning system, which we are already talking about. Early warning system is one of the targets of the global goal on adaptation. It is also a target of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. But then there are two different ministries responsible for the two different streams of work. But we can perhaps work together using early warning system as a common example. We also have good practices emerging. If you look at the Pacific countries, they have one common plan. They don't have different plans for adaptation and disaster risk reduction plan. They have one common integrated plan, and then they implement it together. But we also have good practices emerging in Africa. For example, we know that recently Ghana expanded its existing national coordination mechanism on disaster risk management to also include climate change actors. And now the two systems are working together. We also have national platform in Ethiopia, for example, the Disaster Risk Management Technical Working Group, where the two different ministries work together to implement the disaster risk management policy and strategy of the country, but also the climate resilient and green economy of the country. So we have some good emerging examples, which we have seen, but perhaps a lot needs to be done to strengthen coherence and synergy and turn that into action. On the training resources, they're all free. They're all accessible to everyone. You can take them at your pace, and there are multiple resources available. I can share you the link of one very popular one that we have been implementing from Bonn. It's on comprehensive risk management and talks about coherence and synergy. 12,000 people have taken it. Very simple 2-hour course. You can do it at your pace, your speed, and you get a certificate at the end. The one that we are doing with ICED, which is on auditing, is still in process. So I hope that that training course will be completed by the end of this year, and then we will start rolling it out. And then perhaps through the regional AFROSAI-E working group, we can also let you know when it is ready, so you can benefit from it.
Okay. Mine takes us to when you're talking about officialization of data in terms of Sendai framework and SDG reporting. You know, you will agree with me that for risk management, we need quality data, but my concern is that we have realized that mostly in our countries, you'll find that the kind of data that sometimes we see reported in various platforms is not consistent. It has got some gaps, especially when it's reported or when you look at that data being reported in the UNFCCC website, also through the Climate Watch. Are there any other platforms, or should I say, have you also realized this kind of gaps, or with regard to the data quality? And what are other platforms where we could find this kind of data within our countries, apart from the statistics offices, where we could really rely on that kind of data.
Yeah. No,
Thank you.
thanks a lot, Mohita, too, because that's goes to the very heart of the entire issue that yes, we are not blessed with the best data that we would want to have. But the good thing is that a lot of efforts are being put into having the right data ecosystem in which we work. And it requires a lot of coordination across different ministries and institutions because not one ministry or not one institution will have all the data that we would want to have. And also, it enhances the role of the national statistical offices, which should be the right official repository of all the data that a government would hold. Perhaps I would just take 1 minute to demonstrate one database that we are supporting the countries with, and you might want feel that this is relevant to some of the work that we have been talking about. So that's Disinventor. I've already put the link in your chat box. You can actually go there, and we are actually launching a new version of this system as we speak. But if you click on this map, you will see all the list of these countries which actually have all their data collected by the governments and they share it on a public domain. Let's go to Ethiopia, for example. When you land on the page, you get good data, kind of key aggregated summary statistics. Get some maps. Get which hazard has happened, how many events by different provinces of the country and by year. You will see that the country has collected events up to more than 15,000 events so far, majorly drought, flood, and conflict. Where it becomes even more interesting is somebody wants to get subnational data. You can select the hazard of your interest. You can select your region. You can select your zone. You can select your vereda, which is the three administrative tiers below the national level. And if you don't select anything, everything gets selected. You can select your variable. You want to have which sector you are interested in, health sector, water, or you want to look at the human losses. You can then look all of this data on a map. You can create statistics by cross-tabulating. You can create your reports as you want, or download all this data in Excel form and work in an offline environment in a GIS software or so on. Similarly, this is, pick a country of a choice. I also saw Kenya was there. Same information for Kenya. Select your county and get all the data for that county. Or for that matter, Uganda, one of the countries I myself worked with long back. You have all that data. And this is all the data that the government has themselves collected, goes down to the sub-county level. So that is just one small example of efforts being made in terms of strengthening the data ecosystem. But this is more on disaster, and similar information can also be made available from other sources on financing, which is a bit more murky, I would say. It's not as standardized, but yes, efforts are being made there as well. So hope you found this useful for some of the purposes.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And maybe to give us your closing comments on this, and if there are any other opportunities you want to let open for us in this space, we can take advantage of. Sure.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Richard, and thanks as well for inviting me and good discussions here. I know that this is an area of work which is not very mature enough, which also gives us an opportunity to make it mature by working together. I'm very interested to ensure that the training resource that we are developing with the auditing institution in India, including together with the current chair of WGEA, Thailand, and the former chair, Finland, We're investing a lot into this work, and only through a collaborative work we can make this work. In particular, I'm very interested to work with the AFROSAI-E. I'm not sure whether you know, but I've spent 10 years of my life in Africa, 5 years in Ethiopia, 5 years in Kenya. And when I was in Kenya, I was managing the whole of Africa office as the deputy head of that office. So really, I've spent a good amount of my professional career in Africa, and I really look forward to work with many of the country size in Africa. So it's a beginning of a good partnership. And if you need anything, Richard has my contact. I'll put in the chat box as well. And I also shared the presentation I made. In case you have further questions, feel free to contact me.